In this video, I want to talk with you for a few minutes about how to become great in God's eyes. Now, this may or may not surprise you, but God has a very different definition of greatness and the path to achieving it than the one that we're familiar with in the world that we live in today. Jesus teaches us that the way up is to go down. Again and again, he instructs his followers to be downwardly mobile in an upwardly mobile world. He explicitly taught his first followers that the secret to becoming great is to become a servant. And if that idea sounds strange to you, you can be comforted by the fact that it sounded very strange to them as well. Let's eavesdrop on a conversation that Jesus has with his closest followers that captures the essence of what he wants us to understand about servanthood. This is in Mark chapter 10. It says, "Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came over and spoke to him. 'Teacher,' they said, 'we want you to do us a favor.' 'What is your request?' he asked. They replied, 'When you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left.' When the other 10 disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant, in part because James and John had asked before they could. But Jesus called them all together and said, 'You know that the rulers of this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many.'" See, one thing is, as we read that story, as we hear that conversation, it's clear that James and John thought that greatness was about power and prestige and position. It was about me first, being the one who gets to call the shots. And if we're honest, this approach to greatness makes sense to us, especially in our social media obsessed world that we live in today. Great people are famous. They're celebrities. They're the people who win awards, make a lot of money, live in big houses. That's what we think about greatness. But what Jesus is telling us is, you've got this greatness thing all wrong. You need to adopt a new definition of greatness. Otherwise, he says, you'll completely miss who I am and why I've come. In verse 45 of Mark 10, Jesus summarizes his entire life and mission with two important verbs: serve and give. See, God measures greatness, impact, significance differently than we do. It's not me first, it's you first. It's not get, but give. It's not status, but service. And see, Jesus, when he talked about servanthood, he was not talking about a life where we occasionally volunteer to do an act of service. He was talking about cultivating a servanthood as a lifestyle, living with kind of a you first mindset, reorienting our hearts and our hands to serve others, even during ordinary days. See, this is so radically contrary to our world's definition of greatness that we have a hard time understanding it, much less practicing it. And yet this is the life we're invited into by Jesus. Now the good news is that every one of us can be great in God's eyes because every one of us can serve. Listen to the words of Martin Luther King. He said, "You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You don't need to know Plato or Aristotle. You don't have to know Einstein's theory of relativity. You don't have to know the theory of thermodynamics in physics. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love." And I believe he is absolutely right. In the time we have left in this video, I just briefly want to look at 3 core essentials of servanthood. And the first is, servanthood begins with an attitude. Servanthood starts in our heads and our hearts long before it reaches our hands. For any one of us to live a lifestyle that is marked by serve and give will require a mental shift, a change in how we think about others and also how we think about ourselves. Listen to how Philippians chapter 2 describes this attitude. Paul writes, "Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had." Which just begs the question, what attitude did Jesus have? Well, one of humility. See, Jesus thought of other people ahead of himself, and this is what servants do. Humility is not about convincing ourselves or others that we're unattractive, unintelligent, incompetent, or worthless. See, humility is not thinking less of ourselves, it's thinking of ourselves less. It's a healthy self-forgetfulness. It involves the realization that the world does not revolve around me. Well, how are you doing these days at forgetting yourself? Well, here are a couple of suggestions, some potential next steps to help with this. One would be just to pay attention to your desire for admiration or recognition. See, humility involves taking your mind off of yourself and focusing on God and others. Consider meditating on Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Another possibility would be to be open to serve anyone that you meet. Just look for small, mundane tasks that no one else wants to do, and then do them. Another suggestion would be to practice secrecy. Meet needs, be generous, serve without anyone else knowing. The second attribute is availability. See, being available to serve may mean just giving up the right to control my schedule and allowing God to interrupt whenever he needs to. If I'm genuinely a servant, I don't always get to pick and choose where and when and who I'll serve. This kind of service is rarely spectacular. It is often what might be called the ministry of the mundane. Helping a coworker with a project, shoveling out the snow on a neighbor's driveway. Stopping to help a stranded motorist. Jesus is the ultimate example of one who made himself available to meet the needs of others. He was constantly allowed himself to be interrupted to serve others. Well, how about you? What is your availability quotient these days? Can God mess up your plans without you becoming resentful? Well, here's a couple thoughts on how you could take some steps that direction. Look at your calendar. Is your calendar just feel overloaded? Well, then delete some things off of it. Over busyness is not a badge of honor. God is God, and you're not. The earth will continue to spin even if you pull back from some of your commitments. A second suggestion would be to ask God at the start of each day, who do you want me to serve today? With that kind of attitude, interruptions won't frustrate us as much because we'll be open to whatever God brings into our lives. The third suggestion is to develop an attitude or to develop our attentiveness. See, servants are always on the lookout for ways to help others. Attentiveness does not stop at just awareness or good intentions. It seizes opportunities to be actively helpful. Genuine servants pay attention so that when they see a need, they are able to get personally involved in meeting it. I love what John Wesley says. He says, "Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you can." Well, how do we grow our attentiveness? Well, one way would be to ask God to help us see people the way he sees people. That every person we encounter is precious and important and eternal. Another way is to just slow down and deliberately make space to notice and listen to the people in our lives, especially the people that no one else notices. The third suggestion is that love is in the details. Love remembers. Somebody has a birthday, somebody needs encouragement, maybe giving somebody a gift to lift their spirits. Friends, when we love and serve others, we are loving and serving Christ. It is a wonderful thing for us to raise our hands in worship on a Sunday morning as a way of expressing love to Jesus. But these same hands must be extended outward to love others as well. This is the pathway to greatness. I think if heaven keeps a museum, I don't think it will be filled with grand or astounding mementos of Christianity's long history. I think it will be a small, quiet room filled with ordinary things. A bag of groceries delivered to a needy family. A cup of cold water given to a refugee. A laundry basket of clothes that are washed and ironed for a teenager who may never say thank you. A meal cooked for a sick neighbor. A towel, still damp from wiping feet. See, these will be the souvenirs and the mementos of all of those who have let the attitude of Jesus, that is the heart of servanthood, also be in them. Comments on this? Insights? Any questions you may have? Hit the comments button below and let me know, and I'll respond as quickly as I can.